The World Baseball Classic was exactly that. It was classic. What a tournament. We're joined by Shi Davidi, and this is Instant Analysis brought to you by Tylenol Rapid Release Gel Caps. Rapid Release for Rapid Relief. Shi Davidi, you had to have loved WBC like myself, right? Boy, what a tournament it
Absolutely.
was. Oh, yeah. Shohei Ohtani, Mike Trout, the final out. I mean, you couldn't have scripted it better. We already have confirmation that the tournament will go ahead in 2026. Rob Manfred announced it. You are now the commissioner of the 2026 edition of the WBC. As commissioner, are you making any changes? What do you want to do with the tourney?
Well, I think the one element that you can criticize the tournament for is the fact that you still have some players who are choosing not to play in it. Now, I do think that what you saw over the past couple of weeks will help convince more players to want to be a part of it. I'm sure there's a lot of envy from dudes who were just grinding through the monotony of spring training and watched all that emotional, exciting baseball play out. But there still are some situations where players on certain teams get a bit of a nudge saying, hey, you shouldn't go, or, you're competing for a spot here and we don't see it for 2 weeks. Maybe someone jumps ahead of you. Anytime that's a stuff that's got to get out of the game because you think about the damage that it causes, not just for the elite teams like the United States, but really for the smaller baseball countries, the emerging powers, the Canadas of the world. Every player that they miss is a drastic drop off. And so if you can kind of continue to push forward the quality of the tournament, it's only going to take a further step forward. And to that end, any team that's putting any sort of negative pressure on players, I'm issuing a fine and saying, hey, get on board with this and stop getting in this tournament's way.
That's a very interesting idea. I find that very intriguing. And yes, that was a hot debate. Should players go? Should you not go? Another hot debate, another topic of conversation was the timing of this tournament. We're so close to the regular season, and of course, you saw a couple of star players go down with injuries: Jose Altuve, Edwin Diaz. So, if you could power rank different times of the year that you'd want to have this tournament, or would you leave it in March? Where would you put the tourney?
I've had this conversation with a lot of different people, both players, agents, executives, and there really is no consensus. And I think that's why it keeps landing back at spring training in so many ways. This is the least evil of all the different options. But I do think there's an interesting scenario where you could perhaps create a two-stage tournament where you have one group of teams qualifying to get to say a final 16 during spring training, and then you have the final 16 play a single game knockout tournament over the course of what would otherwise be an all-star break, and you have a pretty short term but epic and exciting tournament. You have guys who are in mid-season form. You're not necessarily asking them to go too far beyond what they already do. I mean, maybe if you're a qualifying team and then you have to go through that spring tournament and then get through again in the All-Star week, that's a bit more demanding, but it's spread out over time. I think that's maybe one possibility, but on balance, when you think about all the different elements, at the end of the season, guys are tired. You're not going to go up against the World Series, so there's a stop and a restart for certain players. That one's not going to work. You're not going to shut down the season for an extended period to host this kind of a tournament. So it has to be something akin to an all-star break type of timeline. I think a staggered two-stage tournament with, a qualification, say for teams 9 to 24 to get into the final 16 with 8 teams that immediately advance into the 16-team tournament at the All-Star break time. I think something like that could potentially work without being too disruptive to the sport.
Would you eliminate the All-Star game altogether in this scenario?
Oh yeah, for sure. And you can't have both. At that point, you're starting to ask for too much.
Yeah.
But I think that's a great trade-off because
Yeah.
you think about what this meant for the game. The Major League Baseball is largely a celebration of Major League Baseball itself, but also a big schmooze fest for corporate sponsors. I mean, if you divert that corporate money into the World Baseball Classic, well, you're helping to fuel an event, make it even bigger, and perhaps giving your sponsors even more bang for their buck as well.
Very interesting idea. I love it. Let's look back to this year's World Baseball Classic and tie it to a Blue Jays angle. Jose Berrios, I think we could all agree he didn't have his best stuff at the World Baseball Classic this year. However, he comes out in his first start since the WBC, and he has a very strong start against the Baltimore Orioles Wednesday. My question to you, did this kind of act as a ramp-up scenario for Berrios, and how's he looking going into the regular season now?
Well, even in talking to him before he left for the World Baseball Classic, he saw that as a natural part of his spring progression. And look, I think he obviously would have wanted to have performed much better in that start than he ended up uh, throwing, or compared to how he ended up throwing the ball. But he understands that there's some back and forth, there's some build up. And I think if you're the Toronto Blue Jays, you look at that outing, you're like, that's not what we were seeing here in camp. And he gets back to camp, he gets back on the rhythm, back into the program with catchers who are familiar with him, and he's back on track. So that's a bit of a relief there. And look, we've seen the World Baseball Classic in the past act as a springboard for certain players into big seasons. For Jose Berrios, maybe this is just a slight detour into what he hopes is a rebound from a tough 2022.
Shi Davidi, we appreciate your insight as always. Let's do this again soon.
Anytime.